It's a Tuesday morning when Isabel Mendoza, a 45-year-old widow and CEO of a €250 million pharmaceutical empire, decides to humiliate her domestic employee with an impossible test. Holding a document written in ancient Chinese that could save her company from bankruptcy, the woman laughs scornfully as she hands the papers to Carmen Ruiz, a 28-year-old employee with a degree in Oriental languages who has been cleaning her marble floors for 3 years. "If you can translate this, I'll promote you to secretary," she says sarcastically, certain that the humble employee can't even read. But what happens when Carmen begins to speak fluently in Mandarin, revealing secrets that could destroy the arrogant widow, will forever change their lives and prove that intelligence has nothing to do with the uniform one wears. The Count's palace dominated the center of Madrid like a monument to aristocratic arrogance. Within its 16th-century walls, lined with Micale marble and original frescoes, reigned Isabel Mendoza, a 45-year-old widow who had inherited a pharmaceutical empire valued at €250 million. After her husband's death in a helicopter accident, Isabel lived her gilded existence with the iron fist of someone born rich who had married someone even richer. Each morning she awoke in her canopied bed, dressed in designer clothes costing more than an annual salary, and spent her days managing Mendoza Pharmaceuticals from her office on the 40th floor of the most exclusive skyscraper in the Four Towers business district. But behind the perfect facade of wealth hid a deeply bitter woman. Her husband's death 3 years earlier had left her alone with a company in crisis and enemies waiting for her downfall. The revolutionary drug the company had bet everything on had proven a failure, and now debts were accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. Her frustration was unloaded daily onto Carmen Ruiz, the domestic employee who had been cleaning the palace for 3 years. Carmen was 28, with brown hair always pulled back in an impeccable bun, and brown eyes that shone with an intelligence Isabel had never noticed. Each morning she arrived at 7 sharp, put on the black uniform with white apron that the lady required, and began cleaning the palace's 60 rooms with silent dedication. Isabel treated Carmen as an extension of the furniture. She gave her dry orders without ever looking her in the eyes. She criticized her for invisible imperfections. She made her repeat work even when it was perfect. For her, Carmen was just the employee, a second-class human being who existed only to serve her whims. But Carmen kept a secret that would have shaken the foundations of Isabel's arrogance. Graduated magna cum laude in Oriental languages and literatures from the Complutense University of Madrid, she spoke fluent Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, and Thai. She had dreamed of becoming an interpreter for the United Nations, traveling the world using her skills to build bridges between different cultures. Fate had other plans. The economic crisis had destroyed the job market for humanities graduates, and when her mother fell ill with cancer, Carmen had to abandon her doctorate to look for any job that would allow her to pay for the treatments. The domestic employee position in the Mendoza household was the only opportunity available, and she had accepted it with the dignity of one who knows that honest work never dishonors. For 3 years she had lived this double life. By day, she was the humble employee enduring Isabel's humiliations. By night, she continued studying, keeping her language skills alive, reading Chinese newspapers online, and following refresher courses. Her mother never knew that her graduate daughter spent her days cleaning floors. Carmen had always told her she worked as a freelance translator. The morning that would change everything began like the others, but with a crucial detail. Isabel woke up in a bad mood, knowing that day she would have to face another meeting with creditors. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the last attempt at salvation seemed to be a mysterious document arrived from a Chinese pharmaceutical company proposing a partnership. The problem was that the contract was written in ancient Chinese, an archaic commercial dialect that even professional translators couldn't fully decipher. Isabel had already spent thousands of euros on linguistic consultations without obtaining a reliable translation. As Carmen was cleaning the house office, Isabel watched with growing irritation the documents scattered on the desk. The frustration over her financial situation, combined with the class arrogance that characterized her, exploded in a moment of pure cruelty. She looked up at Carmen, who was silently dusting a bookcase, and a cruel smile appeared on her lips. Isabel took the Chinese documents from the desk with a theatrical gesture, already enjoying in advance the humiliation she was about to inflict. The idea of testing her domestic employee with something impossible seemed like the perfect pastime to vent her own frustration. Carmen approached with the silent, respectful step she had learned to use in that house, holding the cloth in her hands, her gaze lowered, as expected of a good domestic employee. Isabel waved the documents in front of Carmen's face, laughing with that cutting laugh she used when she felt superior. She explained they were very important documents for her company, worth millions of euros, but written in a language Carmen obviously couldn't understand. Her tone became even more contemptuous as Isabel rose from the armchair, towering over Carmen with all her haughtiness. In a voice dripping with sarcasm, she proposed her diabolical idea. If Carmen could translate those documents, which was obviously impossible, she would promote her to secretary. Isabel burst into laughter at her own joke, convinced she was being incredibly clever. She was sure the little employee would immediately admit her ignorance, thus confirming the lady's intellectual superiority. But Carmen remained silent for a long moment, her face impassive. Conflicting emotions raged in her mind. On one hand, anger at yet another gratuitous humiliation. On the other, the thrill of finally being able to show who she really was. Isabel interpreted the silence as confirmation of her own superiority, but suddenly Carmen raised her gaze and spoke a single word that froze the blood in the lady's veins. "I accept." Surprise quickly transformed into malicious amusement. Isabel thought it would be even better. She wouldn't just humiliate the employee, she would do it in front of concrete proof of her failure. Carmen approached the desk with movements that suddenly seemed different. No longer the submissive walk of the domestic employee, but the confident step of a professional who knows what she's doing. She took the documents in her hands and began to examine them with an attention that planted the first seed of doubt in Isabel's mind. The first paper contained the letterhead of an important Shanghai pharmaceutical house, specialized in traditional Chinese medicine. The second contained the clauses of an exclusive partnership agreement for the European distribution of a revolutionary new drug. But it was the third document that made Carmen's eyes shine, a private letter from the Chinese CEO revealing explosive information about the true motives behind the offer. Isabel had sat down in the armchair facing the desk, prepared to enjoy the spectacle of failure. But when Carmen began to speak, perfectly describing the content of the documents in fluent and precise Spanish, Isabel's world began to crumble. The employee not only knew how to read Chinese, but was analyzing the documents with a professional competence that left the lady dumbfounded. Carmen explained it was a partnership proposal for a revolutionary Alzheimer's drug, with results 40% superior to Western medications. But the most shocking revelation concerned the Chinese CEO's personal letter, which explained why he had chosen precisely Isabel's company for the partnership. The man knew about Mendoza Pharmaceuticals' desperate financial situation and was trying to take advantage of it to obtain extremely advantageous conditions. He was practically giving away the drug in exchange for 90% of future profits. The scornful smile disappeared from Isabel's face like snow in the sun. Not only could her domestic employee read Chinese perfectly, but she had just revealed that what Isabel thought was a lifeline was actually a financial noose. Isabel remained paralyzed for several seconds, her brain struggling to process the impossible. Her domestic employee, the woman she had treated as an inferior for 3 years, was fluently reading documents that the best professional translators hadn't been able to decipher. Carmen delicately placed the documents on the desk and stood up. For the first time in 3 years, she did not lower her head before the lady. Her voice, when she finally spoke, had lost all trace of submission. She formally introduced herself, Carmen Ruiz, magna cum laude graduate in Oriental languages and literatures, specializing in Mandarin Chinese and commercial dialects. The words hit Isabel like slaps. The world she had built on the foundation of class superiority crumbled before the revelation that the woman she had despised for years was actually more educated than her. Carmen explained her story with dignity. She had had to abandon her doctorate when her mother fell ill with cancer, accepting the domestic employee job because it was the only opportunity available to pay for the treatments. Honest work, she added with pride, never dishonors anyone. Isabel suddenly felt small, insignificant. All her class arrogance crumbled before the revelation that she had completely underestimated the person closest to her. But Carmen wasn't finished. With the competence of someone who had spent a year in Shanghai as an intern at an international law firm, she explained that the situation wasn't necessarily disastrous. Dr. Li had made that disadvantageous proposal because he believed Isabel was desperate and would accept any conditions. But if she demonstrated knowledge of the agreement's true value, the situation would change completely. The drug in question wasn't just a product, but a medical revolution that could generate billions in profits over the next 10 years. Li Weiming knew this, and he also knew that no one in Europe yet had the license to distribute it. Carmen proposed a strategy. If Isabel responded by demonstrating perfect knowledge of the agreement's details, proposing an equal partnership instead of passively accepting the Chinese conditions, Li Weiming would respect her as an equal and modify the offer. For the first time in months, Isabel felt a spark of hope. But when she asked Carmen for help, the domestic employee definitively transformed into a businesswoman about to negotiate. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. Carmen agreed to help her, but with one condition. If she saved the company by translating the documents and drafting a response that would guarantee an equal agreement, Isabel must keep her promise of promotion. Not just any secretary, but international relations secretary, with a salary commensurate with her skills and the possibility of personally managing all relations with Asian partners. Isabel hesitated. Accepting meant admitting she had been wrong about everything, that she had underestimated and humiliated a woman who could have been her salvation from the beginning. Carmen smiled for the first time since working in that house. A smile that had nothing submissive or apologetic about it. She explained that Isabel was free to refuse and look for someone else to translate the documents, but she wished her good luck finding someone who understood the Shanghai commercial dialect better than she did. Isabel looked at the documents on the desk. Then she looked at Carmen. For the first time in her life, she found herself in a position where she had to treat as an equal someone she had always considered inferior. The agreement was sealed with a handshake that forever changed the power dynamic in that room. The hours that followed were the most intense and revealing in both women's lives. Carmen transformed before Isabel's incredulous eyes, moving from humble domestic employee to the competent professional she had always been. She spoke on the phone in fluent Mandarin with her university professor, consulted online databases of Chinese commercial law, drafted response drafts with the precision of a diplomat. Isabel watched this metamorphosis fascinated from the armchair that until that morning had been her throne. For the first time in her privileged life, she found herself a spectator of someone else's competence rather than the protagonist of her own decisions. Carmen worked with total concentration, explaining that the key point was to demonstrate to Dr. Li that Isabel was not the desperate businesswoman he imagined, but a partner worthy of respect. The letter had to be written in formal Chinese that denoted education and respect for Eastern culture, but also firmness in business. Each revelation about Carmen's competence was a stab to Isabel's pride. The woman she had humiliated for years had an international resume she could only dream of. A year in Shanghai as an intern at the Morrison & Onchen law firm, specializing in Sino-European joint ventures. When Isabel asked why she had never told her, Carmen responded with disarming simplicity. In 3 years, you never even asked my last name. When should I have told you about my degree? While I was cleaning the floors? While you scolded me because a picture frame was shifted 1 millimeter? The silence that followed was heavy with shame and regret. By sunset, Carmen had completed a 4-page response that completely transformed the terms of the negotiation. Instead of passively accepting the Chinese offer, it proposed an equal partnership agreement guaranteeing both companies equitable benefits and long-term growth. The document was a masterpiece of commercial diplomacy. Carmen had included a paragraph on the Confucian philosophy of business, citing the principle of guanxi, relationships based on mutual respect. It was language that only someone who truly knew Chinese culture could use appropriately. Li Wei-ming would immediately understand that behind this response was someone who had seriously studied China, not someone who had used Google Translate. This would elevate Isabel in his eyes from a desperate Westerner to a respectable partner. Isabel's transformation began that very night. For the first time in years, she didn't dine alone in her grand dining room, but shared a simple meal with Carmen in the kitchen, discussing business strategies and cultural differences between East and West. 2 days later, Li Wei-ming's response arrived. Isabel called Carmen to her office with trembling hands, unable to decipher the Chinese characters alone. Carmen read the letter in silence, then looked up with a radiant smile. Dr. Li had been so impressed by the response that he had completely revised the offer: equal partnership, 50% profits for each party, and a personal invitation to Shanghai to sign the agreement. He also wanted Isabel's cultural consultant to participate personally in the negotiations. That night, Isabel called her lawyer to draft Carmen's contract as Director of International Relations, with a salary that finally reflected her true skills. The following months radically transformed both the company and the relationship between the two women. Carmen went from the domestic employee's uniform to elegant suits from the boutique where she had her small wardrobe, to an office on the 38th floor with a panoramic view of Madrid. But the most profound transformation concerned how they saw each other. Isabel discovered that in Carmen she had not only an exceptional collaborator, but a woman from whom she could learn much. Carmen had an understanding of human relationships that came from having experienced firsthand both poverty and wealth, both humiliation and success. Carmen's wisdom impacted Isabel daily. When the lady asked her how she managed not to hate her after 3 years of mistreatment, Carmen replied that hatred hurts the one who feels it more than the one who receives it. She preferred to think that Isabel was simply someone who had never learned to see beyond appearances, and now she had the opportunity to learn. The trip to Shanghai was a triumph. Carmen proved herself not only as a perfect interpreter, but as a cultural mediator who managed to navigate the complex social dynamics of China with elegance and competence. Dr. Li Wei-ming was so impressed by her abilities that he invited her to become the permanent European representative of his company. During a gala dinner, Li told Isabel that her assistant was one of the most competent people he had ever met in the field of Sino-Western relations. Isabel blushed, looking at Carmen, who was conversing fluently with Chinese executives, and felt genuine pride in her collaborator's successes. Upon returning to Spain, Mendoza Pharmaceuticals had become Europe's most promising pharmaceutical company, with a portfolio of revolutionary products and international partnerships that aroused the envy of competitors. Carmen had finally found her professional path, combining her language skills with a deep understanding of international business. But what made her happiest was being able to pay for all her mother's treatments. Her mother was now winning the battle against cancer. One night, while celebrating the first anniversary of their partnership, Carmen confessed to Isabel what made her most proud. It wasn't the professional success or the salary, but having proven that a person's value doesn't depend on the work they do, but on who they really are. Isabel nodded, reflecting on how much her perspective had changed. She had learned that intelligence and competence can be found anywhere, if only one has the humility to look. 2 years after that morning that changed everything, the Count's palace had become a completely different place. The rooms, which once echoed only with Isabel's solitary footsteps, now vibrated with laughter, conversation, and real life. Carmen no longer lived there as a domestic employee, but she kept an apartment on the 2nd floor that Isabel had renovated as her Madrid residence. Carmen's mother, Esperanza, after winning her battle with cancer, had left the small Andalusian town to live with her daughter in the big city. Esperanza often couldn't believe it was all real, her daughter working in a palace, traveling the world, speaking with Chinese executives as if she'd been born there. But the most beautiful transformation concerned the relationship between Isabel and Carmen, who had gone from lady and employee to true sisters. Isabel had discovered in Carmen not only an exceptional collaborator, but the family she had never had. Carmen had found in Isabel a woman who, once the barriers of pride were abandoned, had revealed herself to be generous and loyal. Nights at the palace were now full of stimulating conversations. Isabel learned Chinese under Carmen's patient guidance, while Carmen learned the secrets of international business from Isabel's experience. Esperanza cooked Andalusian recipes for the three of them, filling the house with forgotten aromas. Mendoza Pharmaceuticals had become the European leader in the distribution of Eastern medicines, with offices in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Seoul. Carmen directed all Asian operations with a competence that had made her one of the most respected executives in the sector. But the greatest success had been personal. During a work mission in Hong Kong, Carmen had met David Chen, a young Sino-American entrepreneur. Their love had blossomed amidst business negotiations and working dinners, united by a shared passion for cultural bridges between East and West. The wedding was celebrated in the garden of the Count's palace, transformed for the occasion into a wonderful blend of Spanish and Chinese traditions. Isabel was Carmen's matron of honor, proud to walk beside the woman she now considered a sister. Dr. Li Weiming came personally from Shanghai for the wedding, bringing with him a delegation of 30 Chinese executives. During the toast, he said it was an honor to celebrate the union of two of the most extraordinary people he knew. 3 years after the wedding, Carmen and David announced they were expecting a child. Isabel cried with joy as if she were becoming a grandmother to her biological family. The child would grow up speaking Spanish, English, and Chinese, becoming a true citizen of the world. The night before Carmen left for her honeymoon in Beijing, the two women sat in the office where it had all begun. The Chinese documents that had changed their lives were now framed on the wall, not as business trophies, but as a reminder of a life lesson. When Carmen asked Isabel if she would do that impossible challenge again, the response was immediate. "It was the stupidest and smartest thing I've ever done. Stupid because I wanted to humiliate, smart because it allowed me to discover who you really are." Carmen replied that she was grateful for every day spent cleaning those floors, because they had taught her that dignity comes from within, and that every experience, even the humblest, can be the first step towards something extraordinary. That night, Isabel fell asleep for the first time in 45 years, knowing she was not alone in the world. She had found a family in the most unexpected way, and had learned that sometimes the greatest miracles are hidden behind the simplest uniforms. The domestic employee had truly done something unexpected. She had saved not only a company, but the soul of a woman who had forgotten how to love. If this story touched your heart, hit like, share in the comments. Have you ever underestimated someone only to discover their true worth later? Do you believe intelligence can be hidden anywhere? Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories that prove appearances are deceiving and that dignity is the truest wealth. Remember, Carmen proved that a person's value doesn't depend on the work they do, but on who they really are. Sometimes the most precious treasures are hidden right where you least expect them.